My name is Simone. In just a few minutes, I am going to walk out onto a brilliantly lit stage as the keynote speaker for the largest artificial intelligence summit in Silicon Valley. I am the sole CEO and founder of a tech empire currently valued at over $2 billion. The media calls me a visionary. The venture capitalists who beg to fund my projects call me ruthless. But exactly 5 years ago, the only thing I was holding was a soggy cardboard box containing a cheap mechanical keyboard and a few coffee mugs. I was standing on a sidewalk in the freezing rain, watching two armed security guards lock the heavy glass doors of a pristine office building. A building that I had secured, a company that I had built from the absolute ground up. We are often conditioned to think of violence as a physical attack. But let me tell you, there is a very specific, deeply paralyzing type of violence that happens in the corporate world. It is clean, it is quiet, and it is executed by men in expensive suits. It doesn't leave a visible bruise on your face. Instead, it systematically strips away your intellectual property, legally drains your bank accounts, and completely obliterates your professional reputation. The men I trusted, the men I called my partners and my friends, didn't just lock me out of my own startup. They assassinated my corporate identity. They legally stole the algorithm that I had spent 3 years bleeding over, taking all the credit, the equity, and the millions of dollars in valuation for themselves. I was left with absolutely $0 and a ruined name. They thought throwing me out into the rain with nothing would completely break me. But they forgot one catastrophic detail. They managed to steal the product, but they couldn't steal the machine that built it. My mind was the factory, and the factory was still fully operational. If you are watching this right now, and you have ever had your brilliant idea stolen by someone who smiled in your face, if your hard work has been completely dismissed, or if you are currently sitting in the ashes of a massive betrayal trying to figure out how to rebuild your life from absolute zero, I need you to...
There is a profound, almost intoxicating danger in being a pure creator. For me, coding wasn't just a career. It was an absolute obsession. While other people saw lines of meaningless text on a black screen, I saw an intricate, beautiful labyrinth. I was building a revolutionary machine learning algorithm that could predict market trends with terrifying accuracy. When I was deep in the code, I was a god in my own universe. But outside of that screen, in the real world, I was dangerously naive. I partnered with two men who had everything I didn't: the expensive MBAs, the tailored suits, and the aggressive venture capitalist vocabulary. They were the perfect frontmen. The dynamic was established very early on, and it was designed to stroke my ego while simultaneously putting me to sleep. They would say, "Simone, you are the absolute genius here. Don't waste your brilliant mind on the boring administrative tasks. You stay in the lab and build the future. We will handle the paperwork and the legal friction." To a hardcore introvert who just wanted to build, that sounded like a dream. In reality, it was the perfect psychological trap. For 2 straight years, I practically lived in a dark office. I survived on stale coffee and 4 hours of sleep a night. My eyes permanently burned from the glow of 3 monitors. I poured my absolute soul, my youth, and every ounce of my intellectual capacity into building out the architecture of our platform. I was the one fixing the critical bugs at 3 a.m. while they were out at luxury steakhouses entertaining potential investors, using my algorithm as the shiny object to raise millions. I remember the night they slid a thick stack of corporate restructuring documents across my desk. I had been awake for 36 hours straight trying to deploy a massive server update. I was physically shaking from exhaustion. One of them tapped the signature line with his expensive gold pen and smiled warmly. "Just standard founder agreement, Simone, protecting the IP for the next funding round. Sign here and go get some sleep." I didn't read the fine print. I signed my name. I trusted them. The most fatal mistake you can ever make as an intelligent woman in business is assuming that everyone else operates with the same moral compass that you do. I thought we were a literally building an empire together. I didn't realize until it was entirely too late that they didn't view me as a partner. They viewed me as an outsourced temporary laborer. They weren't protecting the company for me. They were legally weaponizing the company against me.
The day the guillotine dropped was supposed to be a celebration. The night before, our platform had officially crossed 1 million active enterprise users. We had just secured a Series B funding round that valued the company at over $80 million. I arrived at the lobby that Tuesday morning, exhausted but quietly incredibly proud. I walked up to the glass security turnstiles and swiped my keycard. Beep. Red light. Access denied. I thought it was a glitch. I wiped the card on my jacket and swiped it again. Beep. Red light. Suddenly, the lobby security guard, a man I had bought coffee for every single week, stepped in front of the turnstile. He physically blocked my path, completely refusing to make eye contact with me. He just stared at the floor and said, "I'm sorry, Simone. My orders are to escort you to conference room B on the ground floor." Conference room B was a sterile, windowless glass box. When I walked in, my 2 partners were sitting at the mahogany table, flanked by 3 corporate lawyers in identical, expensive suits. It wasn't a meeting. It was a clinical, highly rehearsed corporate assassination. The lead lawyer didn't even introduce himself. He just slid a single manila folder across the table. Inside was the document I had signed months prior at 3 a.m., the standard founder agreement. The lawyer calmly pointed to a highlighted clause buried deep in the fine print. In dense, suffocating legal jargon, it outlined that any and all intellectual property developed on company hardware belonged exclusively to a newly formed holding company. A holding company in which my shares had been legally and meticulously diluted down to a fraction of a single percent. They weren't just firing me. They were legally confiscating my algorithmic child. The lead partner looked at me with this chilling, manufactured sympathy and said they were terminating my employment due to a failure to align with the future corporate vision. They had the absolute audacity to slide a severance check across the table for 3 months' salary. A measly $20,000 as a parting gift for handing them an $80 million empire. The grief that hits you in a moment like that is entirely indescribable. It is a suffocating, crushing weight on your chest. I looked at these men who quite literally did not know how to reboot a local server or write a single line of Python, and realized they were about to be featured on the covers of tech magazines as brilliant innovators. They were going to become multi-millionaires off the raw intelligence that came directly out of my brain. I didn't scream. I didn't cry in front of them. I refused to give them the satisfaction of seeing my tears. I left their insulting severance check on the table, turned around, and walked out. 30 minutes later, I was standing on the freezing pavement holding a cardboard box with a keyboard and my notebooks, watching the glass doors lock behind me. I was 30 years old, unemployed, utterly legally defeated, and For the first 6 months after the betrayal, I existed in a state of absolute suffocating numbness. I couldn't afford to fight them in court. If I filed a lawsuit, their corporate lawyers would drag the litigation out for a decade, bleeding me dry in legal fees until I was completely broken. They had the millions. I had exactly nothing. I moved into a tiny, damp studio apartment on the wrong side of town. To keep the lights on and pay my rent, the woman who had just architected an $80 million AI platform took a humiliating graveyard shift as a remote Tier 1 tech support agent. I spent my nights resetting passwords and troubleshooting printer errors for people at 2 a.m. It was the ultimate crushing demotion. Every time I opened my phone, I saw articles praising my ex-partners for their groundbreaking technological vision. But anger is a highly fascinating resource. If you let it sit stagnant, it will completely rot you from the inside out. But if you refine it and compress it, it becomes the most lethal, high-octane fuel on the planet. Sitting in the dark of that tiny apartment, I realized something fundamental. A lawsuit would just get me my money back. I didn't want my money back. I wanted to completely annihilate them. I wanted to build a technology so vastly superior, so terrifyingly efficient, that their $80 million company would be reduced to a worthless pile of obsolete code. I didn't have funding, and I couldn't afford a high-end workstation. I bought a cheap, refurbished Chromebook, completely wiped the operating system, and fired up a bare-bones Linux terminal. It was just me, a blinking cursor, and absolute cold-blooded focus. I started writing entirely new logic, line by line in Python. I knew their platform's architecture intimately because I built it, which meant I also knew exactly where its fatal flaws were. I didn't need a 50-person engineering team. I used Docker containers to seamlessly isolate my environments and build an aggressive, ruthless automation workflow that executed tasks in milliseconds. While my ex-partners were sleeping in their luxury penthouses, relying on bloated teams of developers, I was an absolute ghost in the machine, coding with the terrifying speed of a woman who had absolutely nothing left to lose. I want to pause the story right here, because I know I am speaking to someone right now who has been completely written off. Someone who's working a job they hate, using scraped together equipment while watching other people take the credit. I want to ask you, what is the project you are ruthlessly building in the dark right now? What is the empire you are coding in secret? Go down to the comments and leave a black heart. Let the world know you are quietly sharpening your sword. And make sure you are subscribed to Scars and Silk right now, because you need to see exactly how I took that cheap Chromebook and deployed the ultimate Trojan horse. I wasn't just writing code, I was actively writing the corporal vitriol. It took exactly 9 months in that dark apartment to finish the architecture. What I had built wasn't just a competitor to my former company, it was their absolute executioner. Their algorithm required massive servers and took minutes to process complex data sets. Mine was incredibly lean, ran on highly optimized Docker containers, and executed the exact same tasks in a fraction of a millisecond. But I knew I couldn't launch it under my own name. The tech industry is a boys' club, and my ex-partners had already spun a narrative to the venture capitalists that I was just a disgruntled, unstable employee who couldn't handle the pressure. If I knocked on the front door, they would immediately lock it. So I decided to become a ghost. I incorporated a completely anonymous shell company in Wyoming. No physical address, no public board of directors, and absolutely no photos of the founder. I named the entity simply Apex. I didn't have millions of dollars to spend on slick marketing campaigns or aggressive sales teams, but I had something infinitely more lethal. I had the code. I knew exactly who their biggest enterprise clients were because I was the one who had originally built the infrastructure for them. Instead of making cold calls, I built a ruthless, highly sophisticated automation workflow. I used advanced scraping scripts and APIs to bypass the corporate gatekeepers and deliver a perfectly timed, automated demonstration directly into the private inboxes of the chief technology officers at these massive corporations. The message was incredibly simple. Your current AI provider takes 3 minutes to process this data set. Feed it into our secure environment and watch it happen in 3 milliseconds, free of charge for 30 days. When you speak the language of absolute efficiency, the corporate world listens. The CTOs took the bait. They ran their data through my Ghost platform, and the results were completely undeniable. It was a technological massacre. Within 6 weeks, the dominoes started to violently fall. The massive enterprise contracts, the absolute lifeblood of my ex-partner's $80 million valuation, began systematically canceling their renewals. First it was the mid-level accounts, then the massive logistics firms, and finally the crown jewel banking clients. They were all migrating to Apex. I would sit in my tiny damp apartment at 2 a.m., drinking cheap coffee, watching the automated alerts ping on my terminal as another multi-million-dollar contract transferred into my servers. Meanwhile, across the city, panic was setting in. I would read the frantic industry blogs and watch my ex-partners desperately scramble in the press, promising new updates and begging investors for more time. They were aggressively bleeding out, losing millions of dollars a week to a phantom company, terrified of a brilliant competitor they couldn't see, couldn't sue, couldn't buy out. There was a profoundly intoxicating power in absolute anonymity. I didn't need to scream my name from the rooftops. I didn't need to prove my worth in a mahogany boardroom. I just let the silence and the code do the slaughtering for me.
18 months after they threw me out into the freezing rain, the $80 million empire my ex-partners had stolen was completely, entirely decimated. Their valuation had violently crashed, their investors had pulled out, and they were bleeding cash so fast they couldn't even make payroll. They were absolutely desperate. In a final, humiliating act of survival, they reached out through corporate brokers to the mystery CEO of Apex, begging for an acquisition buyout. They wanted to sell the rotting carcass of their company to the very ghost that had destroyed them, just to walk away with a fraction of their dignity. I agreed to the meeting. I requested that it take place in their headquarters, specifically in conference room B on the ground floor. I remember the exact outfit I wore that day, a razor-sharp tailored charcoal suit and a pair of very quiet, very expensive heels. I walked through those same glass lobby turnstiles, the ones I was once physically blocked from entering, and the security guard didn't say a word. He just nervously pointed toward the glass box. Through the glass, I could see my two ex-partners sitting at that same mahogany table. They looked 10 years older. They were sweating, nervously adjusting their ties, waiting for the elusive billionaire CEO of the company that had slaughtered them in the open market. I placed my hand on the heavy glass door and pushed it open. When I walked into the room, they both instinctively stood up to shake hands, their faces locked in those manufactured corporate smiles. But as their eyes finally registered who was standing in front of them, the blood entirely drained from their faces. The sheer, suffocating terror that washed over them is a memory I will cherish for the rest of my life. The silence in that room was so heavy, it felt like the air had been sucked out of the building. Neither of them could speak. Their jaws were practically wired shut in shock. I didn't yell. I didn't gloat. I didn't even raise my voice above a quiet whisper. I simply walked over to the exact seat where I had been fired, sat down, and slid a single manila folder across the mahogany wood. Inside was an acquisition contract. I wasn't offering them millions. I was offering to buy their entire company, their remaining servers, and the rights to their names for absolute pennies on the dollar. I looked the lead partner dead in his terrified eyes and said, "You have exactly 3 minutes to sign this document, or I walk out that door and let you file for bankruptcy on Monday morning." Their hands physically shook as they signed their empire over to me. The moment the ink was dry, I stood up, took the folder, and fired them both on the spot. I bought the company that stole my life's work, not to run it, but just to have the absolute pleasure of legally liquidating it into dust. I walked out of that glass box, leaving them sitting in the exact same cold corporate ashes they had once left me in. They thought they had assassinated my career. They didn't realize they had just handed me the absolute monopoly. There is a massive, fundamental misconception in the business world about where true value actually lives. When you pour your soul into a project and someone ruthlessly steals it from you, your first instinct is to believe that you have lost everything. You feel empty. You feel like your entire worth was wrapped up in that one specific algorithm, that one business plan, or that one promotion. But you have to understand the absolute truth. You are not the product. You are the factory. They can manipulate the contracts. They can legally confiscate your intellectual property. They can drain your bank accounts. And they can stand on a stage and take all the credit for your sleepless nights. But they can never, ever steal the architect, the raw intelligence, the relentless drive, and the sheer unfiltered brilliance that built the first empire are still fully locked inside your mind. And because you built it once, you can build it again. Only this time, you will build it with teeth. To the woman watching this who was sitting in the absolute wreckage of a betrayal, the woman who trusted the wrong business partners, the wrong company, or the wrong people in her life, I know the anger is consuming you right now, but I need you to take that rage, pull it out of your chest, and weaponize it. Stop crying over the stolen prototype. Open a new terminal. Start writing a new code in the dark.
But this time, you learn the most non-negotiable rule of business. Never, ever build your castle on someone else's land. You own your name on paper. You own your intellectual property. You read every single line of the fine print, and you become the absolute master of your own legal domain. Because a highly intelligent, intensely focused female mind is the most lethal weapon in the corporate world. If this story reminded you of your own power today, do not keep it to yourself. Send this video to a woman who needs to remember exactly who she is. Drop a black heart in the comments below to let the world know that the architects are waking up. And hit that subscribe button to join the Scars and Silk Empire. We are building a global network of women who refuse to be victims of corporate or emotional assassination. We don't just bounce back, we completely take over the board. Keep building in the dark. They won't see you coming until it's entirely too late.